All right. Well, hello everyone. So I'm going to kind of go over some of the pros and some of the cons that I had of not only working for Swift, but also working for just any OTR company essentially. So it's basically just going to be like some of the pros I liked, and then the cons that I did not like. And then some of the cons will kind of be more like neutral, but I put them in con because they're more of a con than they are a pro. So anyway, to start it off, the first I wanted to go off of pros and then cons. So to start it off, it'll be pros. I have four pros with like five or six cons, but like I said, not all of the cons will be super negative. It'll be more neutral. So it might sound a little bit crazier, but I'll make that clear when I'm saying it. So anyway, the first one was flexibility, which is what I've noticed some people said they had issues with, but at least the companies I've worked for, flexibility was there. Like if I needed time off, they would give me time off, and if I had like a family death or whatever else it might be, they would give me up to a week of just dealing with that to go to the funeral service or whatever else it might be that I have to do. So that was really nice, having that type of flexibility. For me, I mean, that would be number one. And I guess I'll rate these as well to make it a little bit like easier to know what I mean by a neutral, a good pro versus a weaker pro, so on and so forth. So if I were to rate that, I would say it's been pretty much a 10 out of 10, honestly. Every company I gone to, which mainly have been megas like Werner and Swift, but I also have been at Varia, which is a smaller carrier of like 300 trucks or something like that. They have like 260 some odd drivers when I was there, more medium size. They even also had a lot of flexibility. Actually, they probably had the most flexibility, honestly. Um, so with them, I mean, okay, so I guess I'll put like it based on a company basis. So like with Swift, I would say it's like an eight or so. They gave me flexibility, but also at the same time, while I was over dealing with things, they would call me being like, what to like set your PTA to, or just asking work things, and it's like, no, just leave me alone. With Werner, I didn't really have any issues really with them with family related stuff, so I didn't really have to worry about that. But the times that they did give me flexibility, I would say that would probably be around the same. They just wouldn't give me as many days, but then again, it wasn't like family deaths or anything like that that I had to deal with. Um, so then with like Varia, for moving, for whatever else it was, they would give me time off, and they would give me a good bit of time. Like my typical schedule was 10 to 12 days out, 5 days home. So even just with that, the flexibility was a lot. With my guaranteed pay of 1,200, which isn't the greatest, but the guaranteed pay is just for a minimum essentially. So I mean, with them, I would say it's probably more like a 10. Um, but then also, like for the next pro, what I really like about driving OTR is I like traveling through the states. I like going to new places, things like that. So traveling would be number one. But also, I mean, at the same time, it could also be a con depending on where you're going to. Some places you might be like, this is why I don't like OTR. But then some places you'd be like, oh yeah, this is why I like OTR. So I mean, traveling is another big pro. For me, that's definitely a 10 because I like traveling. That's like my favorite thing about the job. Um, but then also for benefits, there's some good benefits depending on the company you go to. Companies like Knight and Swift will pay for your tuition through colleges and universities that they partner with. So yeah, they'll give you free tuition and whatnot through universities that they partner with, and I think even some colleges. So that's nice. But then you have like health, dental, vision, and from for my area, it's kind of out of network most of them. So for me, it's not really too great. So I would say really the only good pro that I had with the benefits so far has really only been with Swift for like paid tuition. But then again, that means you have to be with Swift for 2 to 4 years for them to pay for your tuition. And most people don't want to be at Swift for that long. And so, I mean, there's not a lot of people who are going to take advantage of that. So for me, that's more of a neutral, like a 5 or so out of 10, maybe a 6 out of 10. Definitely more of a neutral because that's really the only good benefit. Because even health and whatnot, you have to pay a lot of money for it. Unless you're California, then you could get Kaiser, I believe, and that's probably the cheapest. But then your care is not quite as great. But also another big pro that I've always had was independence. Being able to do things on my own and planning things out on my own. That's always a really good pro for me. Uh, but also at the same time, with that means you also are not home often, at least for OTR, and you don't have other people to interact with. Your only interactions are with like dispatch, driver leaders, planners, and dealing with them is it's been rough sometimes. So I mean, independence is great, but also not great at the same time. I'd say it depends on who you are. Some people might really like it being alone. Some people might not. I like interacting with other people and whatnot. So that's also one of the reasons why I'm happy about going to Lamers, because obviously I'm driving other people. You get to interact with other people and you get to do things with other people. And that's the type of thing that I like. But then into things I don't like. What I don't like is long hours with little pay, and I'm going to branch those together because they kind of go hand to hand. So, like, at least with megas, because it's a little bit different with smaller carriers or like hourly paid carriers, but then hourly paid carriers are usually more home daily. You're doing a lot of work. Uh, and a lot of that work, there's a good portion of it, I'd say at least 30% of your work, maybe 25% of your work is not paid for. It's all on duty time, and then it cuts into your pay. So, like, for example, sometimes they want you to be on duty when you're getting loaded. No, I'm not going to be on duty when I'm getting loaded because I don't get paid for that. And if I'm on duty, then that's cutting into my clock. Um, things like that. So like if you wanted to follow your hours of service to the T, you're going to be making probably only $300 or $400 a week, and making that much money when you're away from home for 2 to 3 weeks at a time, or 4 weeks, or even 8 weeks for some people, does not seem worth it whatsoever. So for me, that would be a really, really big negative. The biggest negative. And if you wanted to categorize those as two, then go ahead. Long hours, I'd say, is the worst, along with little pay is the worst. And then the next one would be like you have no time with your family. At least with OTR, you're always out 2 weeks at a time. At least for my case, it was 2 weeks at a time. I could have did 1 week, but then that means that I have to drive 4.5 hours to and from work every weekend, and then that only gives me 1.5 days. So then one or like half of those days are going to be like that. Half day is going to just be traveling. So I only have one full day here. So I mean that didn't work out for me. But yeah, just no time with your family. If you have a girlfriend or a wife, or if you have a husband or a boyfriend, um, there's like really no time spending with them. You might get 4 to 6 days out of a month, maybe 2 to 4 for some other people who are less lucky. And honestly, for like a relationship, that's not really the greatest. And that was one of the big problems I had as well. Just not spending time with my girlfriend, like it, it, it wouldn't be as big of an issue for me if she was fine with it. Um, but because she didn't like it, it made it a little bit harder for me. Because I don't want to be doing things that she doesn't necessarily like, but she just deals with to deal with it because she understands. So that's one of the big reasons. Probably the biggest reason outside of long hours and little pay that I decided to leave OTR and look for something more local is just not spending that time. And then especially if you have kids, it's gonna be really bad. Like it, yeah. There's so many things that just go into that. Um, but then also, like I was saying when I was talking about the pros, um, like when I was talking about the independence and dealing with like dispatchers, that's one of my biggest neutral cons. I would say, uh, just kind of dealing with dispatch, dealing with corporate, which is even worse than dealing with dispatch, dealing with planners, which is basically the same as dealing with dispatch. But honestly, I would think I'd rather deal with the planner directly than with my dispatch, because then what you get from your dispatch is not always what your planner said, because for whatever reason, they just don't understand anything they say. So the communication sucks between departments. But yeah, dealing with dispatch, I would say if I were to rate it, it's like a 6, but that's because I'm rating dispatch alone. So that's more of like a neutral, but leans con. But then dealing with your corporate, that one would be probably a up there with little pay. Um, there's just been so many times that I had to deal with corporate, like when I was changing the account or uh, from company to owner op or owner op to company, and they just take forever, and then they don't understand what you're telling them, and then they like question everything, and just dealing with them is like, I don't know, it just feels like dealing with like a child essentially. Um, just kind of ruins the experience. Like for example, when I was changing accounts, they're like, oh yeah, it should only be like an overnight process, and then it ended up being like a week and a half, 2 week process, because they wanted me to go home so then they could figure things out, then come back, and then all I had to come back for was just a ride along, which I could have literally just done in the yard. It was the easiest thing I ever did. I wasted a day with no pay just on a ride along when they could have just told me in an hour what I had to do. It was annoying. But then also the stress, like you have a lot of stress because of like dealing with not seeing your family, and then your family wanting to see you, and then dealing with corporate in some cases, dealing with your dispatch, dealing with traffic, dealing with your hours of service, sometimes lack of sleep, depending on loads, especially if you're reefer, at least for me, because a lot of reefer was night. And for me, that was hard for me because I don't really drive well at night because I get tired from all the lights. Um, but some people prefer that, which I prefer that for traffic reasons, but I don't prefer it for reasons of like feeling exhausted when I'm not really tired, because the moment I park, then I can't go to sleep. But then I start driving, and then I want to park because I'm tired, and it's just constantly fighting essentially. But yeah, I mean, those are the biggest pros and cons. There's also little ones as well, which I don't feel are too necessary to talk about. But overall, I mean, if you don't have a family and you go for a company that actually gives you decent pay, um, and even some companies that pay you for your on duty time, even if you're not driving, then I mean, it could be worth it for you if you, like I said, don't have that family, that like that immediate family, like kids or a husband, a wife, a girlfriend, a boyfriend, whatever it may be, and you're fine with some of your hours that you work not being paid, because it's just going to be natural with trucking. Um, sometimes there's gonna be hours that you're working that you feel like you should get paid for that you're not gonna get paid for, and that's just trucking. So if you're okay with that, which I mean, for the most part, I'm okay with that as long as it doesn't cut into like a good portion of my time, because sometimes it could be from like 6 in the morning to noon that you're doing things and you have yourself off duty. Obviously, you don't start your clock or anything. Um, but you should be getting paid for that, and they're telling you to do it. And honestly, you should be logging it as well. Um, but they don't pay you. Like, for example, when I was changing accounts, like when I was going through the yard and they were showing me certain things on how to do things for the account, or dealing with the office, assigning me things, things like that. Like, you would think that you would get paid for that, but you don't, because obviously it's trucking. If the wheels ain't moving, you're not making anything. So if you're okay with that, then yeah, I mean, you could get paid pretty decently. I mean, you could still get paid pretty good. But if you look at it in a perspective of, um, so here's the hours I worked this week. If I convert this to hourly, this is the hour rate, and some people get an hour rate of like 15 an hour, and they're like not okay with that, even though they have like $1,000 take home or something for that week. Sometimes they're not okay with it, even though they're okay with the amount of money they have. They're not okay with the amount of hours they work to make that money, and feeling like they should have made more. Which, I mean, I haven't really felt that way too much, because I kind of don't follow the hours of service fully right, honestly, to be honest with you. Like, I'm not going to log certain things that they want me to log on duty when I'm not getting paid for it. I'm going to log it off duty. I'm sorry. If I'm not getting paid for it, I'm not logging it on duty. So I'm pretty strict with my logs like that. But in the opposite sense of the FMCSA. But yeah, I mean, overall, it could be worth it for you. You could get paid pretty good if you go for the proper company. But it usually takes you 6 to 12 months before you could go into a company that actually pays you decently. 6 months is still kind of pushing it. You should probably go more towards 12 months or more. And then you could go to companies that pay you like 12, 13, 1400 take home a week or more sometimes. And then they give you like guaranteed pay, guaranteed miles. If you don't make those miles for whatever reason, like you're waiting on a load and that makes you only get 1,500 miles in a week, there's some companies that'll be like, okay, well, that's not your fault, therefore we'll give you 1,000 miles extra paid, so it reaches 2,500 miles, because that's what they expect you to run. And if they weren't able to get you to run their expectation, then they will pay you for the difference. But yeah, I mean, for me, it wasn't worth it. Just having a family and was enough for me. The pay was okay-ish, I guess. At Swift, it was really only like 700-800 average per week. But you could go on to accounts that pay you like 1,000 average per week, and that's take home. That's after taxes. That's not your gross pay. Gross pay be more like 11 to 1,400, maybe 15 or 1,600 on good weeks. And some people, if they have like the 8 years or so in, or a million miles, they could be making 2,000 a week, or even 2,500 in a week gross. But yeah, I mean, and per diem helps a little bit, but per diem kind of depends a little bit on like the amount of hour, or the not the amount of hours, but the amount of miles you driven. Uh, so sometimes you can make more, sometimes you can make less. It's a little complicated, but yeah. Anyway, that's essentially that. If you have any questions or anything about what I said, or want anything clarified, feel free to put it in the comments below. But yeah, that's that for this video. Hopefully, you guys keep on going. Hopefully you guys keep on making that money, and have a good one.